Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Front Door. I'm Scott Benedict. For those of us involved in the retail community here in Northwest Arkansas, we have seen an increased emphasis by Walmart on their marketplace business on Walmart.com, both here in the US, as well as growing their marketplace efforts in other markets such as Canada and Mexico. Now, some might say that this effort is a competitive response to Amazon. And yes, it certainly is that. Others in our industry might say that the growth of the marketplace segment is also an opportunity to generate revenue beyond just selling merchandise. Walmart, for example, sells services to marketplace sellers, including fulfillment services, provide advertising services, access to new markets, and the opportunity for sellers to sell to Walmart customers directly without having to go through and negotiate with a category buyer. And if you thought that, yes, all of those factors are true. However, missing in all discussions and strategies related to marketplace selling is the fact that the rivalry between Walmart and Amazon, particularly here in the US market, is just a small part of the broader story of digital retailing globally. In fact, according to a recent study, the projected global gross merchandise value, or GMV, of global marketplace is projected to reach 3.8 trillion US dollars in 2024. Marketplace selling is expected to garner 12.4% penetration of global retail sales overall and approximately 30% of e commerce sales worldwide. So clearly, a big, big opportunity for everyone across the retail ecosystem. And with a retail market opportunity of that size and scale, both today and in the future, retailers and consumer brands alike are rightfully asking themselves, what is our strategy to take advantage of this vast growth engine? Now, for my part, I've been reading a recent study on digital marketplace published by the Ebeltoft Group. Ebeltoft, if you're not familiar with them, is a global alliance of brand and retail consultancies with experts in 20 retail markets around the world. And one of those experts is my friend Jim Okamura from McMillan Doolittle, an affiliate of the Ebeltoft Group that is based in Chicago. And Jim joins us today from his home outside Chicago. And Jim, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me back, Scott.
It is my pleasure. And I'm really excited, was really excited to read this study and to kind of get your thoughts a little bit about this to kind of maybe set up the conversation, if you would. Tell us a little bit about this study and why you and the team at Ebeltoft felt it was an important aspect of what's going on in the industry, important enough to pull this study together.
Yeah, thanks. The background within the Ebeltoft group was we always kind of look at our clients, as a whole, and our clients are kind of an interesting mix of retailers, brands, tech solution providers, as well as investors. And digital marketplaces is a topic that has been growing around the world and really touches all of these, stakeholders. So we thought this was kind of good timing to perhaps raise some awareness amongst clients that perhaps needed to dive a little bit deeper into the whole digital marketplace sector and decide are we doing everything that we really can be doing.
Makes sense. Now, for many of us, the view of marketplace selling is really rooted in Amazon, Walmart, maybe some other major retailers. One of the things I got from this study and what the study tells us is that there are a number of different types of digital marketplaces around the world. I'm sure I didn't really know that. I'll bet a lot of folks in our audience didn't either. Can you kind of lay out what are the different types of marketplaces that you are seeing out there worldwide?
Yeah, it is something that we've seen this proliferation of marketplaces, in a lot of different countries, and I think from a U.S. lens, I think we obviously are so familiar with the biggest players, Amazon and Walmart, obviously at the top of the pyramid. But really, what we've seen take place over the past really decade or so, but is really seeing where there's been a lot of vertical marketplaces, so something like a Zalando in Europe, focusing in the fashion sector, or a Newegg here in the US, that has specialized in computers and electronics. We obviously see a lot of the big global players, and their various, versions of marketplaces that they're standing up, across, different marketplaces. So, I'm not sure, how many people really know that JD.com is really, behind Timu globally, or Alibaba is really behind the Spanish marketplace Moravia. So again, you see some of the global players, really starting to spread their geographic, footprint. So countering this, we often see what we kind of call local heroes. So these again are often, country specific general merchandise marketplaces. Bol.com, BOL in the Netherlands, is a great example, or Allegro in the Polish marketplace, notably did their IPO about 5 years ago, and it was a huge, like listing in the markets, over there. C discount, in France, is another one. So again, we see a lot of these, local hero marketplaces, also really competing against some of these players. But the one type of marketplace that we thought also deserved a little more scrutiny and analysis, was what we call the hybrid marketplace. These are traditional store-based retailers who have decided to really evolve their e-commerce operation into a third-party, digital marketplace. And we find this kind of fascinating, just in the general, digital transformation. You and I have been living across in the retail sector now, for decades. But when we start to look at the marketplaces and the opportunity now for unified or omni-channel capabilities within a third-party marketplace, that kind of gets exciting, at least for the guys like us, who live and breathe, retail. And so just seeing again, where these hybrid marketplaces, and obviously that would include Walmart and Target here, but you may not know that J. Crew has their third party marketplace, or over in Europe, Leroy Merlin in the DIY sector, or Maison du Monde in the home sector. Again, the traditional store based retailers who have really been building out their digital marketplaces at the same time. So lots of different variations that we're seeing out here, and I think a lot of this was really driven in the past decade or so, as these different types of retailers were really looking at what are some ways that we can be growing, right? And I think the marketplace model certainly has a lot of attraction in terms of the business model itself. And I think, that's something that I think is still a lot of brands and retailers aren't as familiar as they should be with. Okay, what is my opportunity here? Not just to sell more product, but to really perhaps, look at, this changing business model. And you alluded to it earlier. What kind of, services might we provide, that leverages our back end, for example?
It's neat, and I think that just the sheer number and type of marketplace business models that exist, to your point, not only here in the U.S. but around the world, was one of the key learnings that I got out of the study. That I don't think, as close as I am to retailing, I don't think I really saw. And it's interesting. Digital marketplaces are not really new, but it feels like marketplaces are becoming a bigger growth driver than many in our industry, than the retail community really perceive. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation, we were having in our global e-commerce, conference that we host, where we were asking some large global brands who were very actively selling through digital marketplaces, in various countries, around the world. We are kind of saying, are these the new distributors? Are these the new international distributors? That really take a clearly a digital first approach. We've heard from a number of these brands over the years. As they have been doing a full scale review of their distributor partners and kind of saying, what do you bring to the digital party? So to speak, right? And I think and the answer to that generally is, it really varies across, those distributors. So some distributors we do find, are very digital first and really have been, built to, help sell through, digital channels. Others are clearly of, kind of old school, wholesale, distribution, being a classic middleman, and hopefully providing, some added value through those, services. But they're not really bringing a lot, from a digital, perspective. So just something like that, where we see, brands kind of, almost looking at marketplaces as a new way that they, we should be, really thinking about distributing our products, across various markets.
Right. One of the interesting quotes that I saw in the study, it was early on in the study, was, and I quote, every consumer products company needs to have a marketplace strategy. And I thought that was interesting and a little bit profound, to be honest. My question is, I suspect that quote is in there because that's not really the case. And if that's so, why is that important?
Yeah, I do agree with that statement. When one of the experts that we interviewed in this study, said that it made a ton of sense to me that every consumer products company really does need to take a look at how they are approaching marketplaces as a whole. I think that's kind of why our two primary hypotheses in this study were kind of focused on brand control for the seller, as well as data and insight sharing between the marketplace operator and the third party brand seller. And both of those are, in our view, certainly big strategic issues. What is that customer experience we as a brand strive for? What are our brand's standards and values, and everything that there's so much work that goes into any branding book or Bible that might you might see a big brand kind of operate their business by. So not surprisingly, they would look at marketplaces, especially I'd say marketplaces of old, where they might eye them suspiciously as are we really going to have a brand experience that lives up to our expectations, for our brand? Right. And so that's something we've clearly seen, kind of change, over time, and I think, Walmart's, brand shop, program, is a great example, launched earlier this year. The ability, for, again, a third party brand seller to really customize, their storefront within, the Walmart, marketplace, and really stay on brand, while doing so. So those are things that we've seen happening, and yet it's not across the board with all marketplaces. Hence, why we were kind of assessing or auditing the different capabilities across these marketplaces in 11 countries. The second, hypothesis, was really, grounded in, again, something, topic that you and I, love, which is data and insights, right? I mean, from day one, in the digital retail world, we um, respect and the data and what we can really do with that. So it's almost a natural evolution, for us to see, well, how will the retailer again help the seller by perhaps sharing, some of those data and insights in the form of, technology and tools or other programs that they might, have in place. So these are things that, we think will change, kind of gradually. It's not going to happen overnight. We know people, want to really protect, that data. It's everyone kind of knows, the value of that. So I think judiciously sharing, some of that data and insights was something that we kind of wrote about in the study.
Neat. So I have to tell you, to put kind of a local lens on this, one of the things I have begun to see among Walmart supplier teams is that some of them are now beginning to assign a leader on their team in their organization to their marketplace strategy. And I'm wondering if through your lens and through your colleagues at Ebeltoft, is that a trend that you're seeing, that brands are saying we're going to, in addition to selling to a retailer directly and having the team associated with that, we're going to put a body or perhaps multiple bodies focused on the marketplace strategy as a component of the broader strategy with that retail partner.
This is not something that I think, we're seeing as commonplace, but I love, what I'm hearing. Tell me a little bit more about this, Scott. What do you give me an example of okay, for a given category team, like
Yeah.
where's the marketplace specialist sit within that, team?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I've seen a couple of examples of it. One where it is a person that sits on and reports up through the Walmart account team. And in some other examples with some major brands, I'm seeing that it's a home office based or corporate office based leader that not only does it for a retailer like Walmart, but for some of the other platforms as well. The big change for me that I have seen is the fact that so many brands went from treating marketplace selling as, for lack of a better description, a bit of an annoyance, something that was handled by somebody else that occasionally caused some headaches or some heartburn or some problems for the Walmart team because they didn't have knowledge or control of what was going on. It's transitioned to be, hey, we're going to control this strategy. We're going to control how our brand is depicted on this platform, whether it's products we sold to the buyer or products that we the brand place onto the marketplace. So that's the thing I've started to see. And to your point, it's not widespread, but I've seen it more than once and enough that the ex buyer in me says, I think I see a trend beginning to emerge.
And has that been translating then, to what was once is strictly a third party seller on the marketplace now being, a one piece seller, or again, that relationship is kind of
Yeah.
broadening, expanding. They're selling more, products through multiple means.
Yeah. I think the thing that I'll tell you, I've seen here, Jim, and on Walmart supplier teams is a scenario where one, as part of the joint business planning process between this brand and the Walmart team, the challenge has come. We want all of your products. We want your full catalog on Walmart.com, and marketplace selling is how they accomplish perhaps some of those, getting some of those long tail items on the site when a buyer has not selected it and Walmart has not place an inventory investment in it. Number one, and then number two has been that there's a great, in addition to revenue and sales, there's a great intel opportunity. Some of the things that you were talking about previously, to understand consumer acceptance of that item. Perhaps it's an item that isn't available in the broader marketplace, or new design, new packaging, new price points. It's a way to gather intel and data in addition to selling more revenue, but it falls within the purview of the Walmart account team. So now they have the visibility, the control, and the insights that come from that within their purview instead of leaving it to somebody else. And to the point that you were making, that's something that is garnering greater and additional interest and again, it's starting to be a trend. It hasn't gone broad based yet, but I'm going to continue to watch it. And it just, within the context of this study, it felt like an interesting development.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think it's going to be a really interesting thing to kind of monitor in coming years. What type of team structures, like might we see? I mean, in the study, we were able to access some good headcount, benchmark data for hybrid, marketplaces. So, one of the first things, we observed was kind of light, like it's just not a big team, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
talking, like pretty big, like complex, retail, businesses with lots of
Yeah.
deep, categories, and yet really it's a pretty thin, crew that are responsible for managing the marketplace. So as the marketplace business models kind of grow, and we assume like a some will flourish, I do expect we'll see more of those types of hybrid or matrixed types of roles, right? I mean, this brings me back to some of the earliest org design studies that I did for the NRF, dating back more than 15 years ago now. But at that time, we were looking at the bridge roles, as we call them, right? Those
Right.
classic matrix roles. Poor person who was in those roles had to straddle both the digital and the core traditional team, and yet that worked, right? It still does, to this day. To this day, I still think we find a lot of those kind of matrix roles very hard to plan for succession, but it's a really interesting role again that allows both teams to be informed. I mean, less things fall through the cracks, essentially. So just that kind of level of communication, we expect to see more of that, right? So who's going to be in those roles, at a category, level, right? To again, make sure that the core, merchant team, it realizes, have you seen this one third party seller? They're knocking it out of the park, right? And
Right.
again, what are they doing differently? How do we take a look at them and perhaps look at a different way to again build that kind of relationship. So I do hope we see more of these kind of matrix or bridge roles kind of emerge, as more of a spotlight is put on the marketplace model itself.
It feels like a certainly an additional opportunity, not only for the seller, for the consumer brand, but for the retailer as well, because they obviously can get some key learnings from those broader items in the marketplace in terms of understanding what their customer is interested in or really looking for, and they're not constrained by the physical space requirements of a physical store. So, one of the things that if it would go backwards in time a little bit, one of the initial plays for retailers in developing a marketplace strategy seemed like it was expanded product offerings, offering a broader assortment when that was the key driver of shopping online without having the inventory investment. But it feels like while that's still true, there's a lot of benefits for the retailer beyond just those initial wider product offerings plays. It feels like there's other benefits for them. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You kind of mentioned this earlier in terms of some of those services, whether it is fulfillment services or advertising services, and I think this is where we're starting to see the convergence of another mega trend within retail in terms of retail media networks, right? And who's at the forefront of retail media networks but digital marketplaces? Surprise, surprise, right?
Right.
So again, that you start to see some of these services being offered, and when you really take a deep dive at the financials and kind of the business model, this is, I think, what gets a few eyebrows raised amongst, some, say, long time, retail executives when they kind of look at, what's that contribution margin, of, the product they might be selling, in a traditional manner versus, again, taking this bundle of, revenue from a third party, seller, and again, and all doing so without, again, having to put forward the capital, for inventory investment.
Right.
That's certainly what has caught a lot of, like attention amongst senior executives. Now, that being said, we also know that, that rush for companies to kind of stand up their own, marketplaces was fraught with, risk for those, who didn't, know that, okay, this is not something you can flip a switch all of a sudden, and again, be a successful marketplace, right? So,
Yeah.
that's what I found kind of interesting, that so many companies were kind of enamored of the marketplace model for all these, kind of uh, positive theoretical, factors, but
Yeah.
without, I think, really taking a close look, a good hard look in the mirror and go, do we have the bones, for this, right?
Yeah.
And
Eh,
if not, what do we need to do to build those bones or that foundational layer
Yeah.
before we start to kind of aggressively grow this business? So,
Yeah.
and this is where I think there's been also a lot of discussion again in our global e-commerce conference around the role of marketplaces in international growth strategies, right?
Mhm.
In some cases, because of the faster speed to market, of selling on, marketplaces, it's been a great way for a brand, to really test out their brand equity in another
Mhm.
market. Do the consumers actually, do they know of us? Do they understand what our brand stands for and the values we have behind it? But again, just being able to do that so quickly, as opposed to, again, in a more traditional model, whether it's distributor based or standing up your own direct e-commerce in another country. Marketplaces have a lot of advantages, so we see that happening with a lot of brands. How do we strategically use marketplaces as a global growth driver? Whether or not the long game means that yeah, we're going to have the majority of our international sales going through that, or again, we start to bring that into some of our own channels, right? Whether our own stores or our own DTC e-commerce. So yeah, a lot of different ways that you can for both a brand and a retailer to think about their marketplace. And that's why we think that they're at this, I'd still say, early-ish days of a lot of marketplaces. We're going to see, I think, a lot of those business models kind of change and evolve over time, and the teams supporting them, just to your earlier point, I think
Yeah.
will be also evolve.
Yeah, one of the things that occurred to me while you were sharing those thoughts is I can't help but see things sometimes through the lens of a former buyer, and there's that saying about speed kills, and occasionally that focus on speed led to items getting placed on the marketplaces that had not had the proper buyer scrutiny about, is this authentic product or fake? Is it safe product or not safe? Is it outdated or not really legal for a particular market? It perhaps came from another market in the form of a gray good purchase. And I think that's one of the things that, for all the positives, and there's countless, and now there's a lot of guardrails put in place by Amazon and others to keep those things from happening. But in many cases, those guardrails were result of some hard learnings about yeah, some stuff got sold on our site, got placed on our site, and then got sold on our site that should have never been presented to a consumer for all those reasons I just mentioned, right?
And those are clearly some of the, I'd say, operational risk of the of marketplaces, right? And I think why we see different again, variations, to marketplaces out there. Targets, marketplace is famously invitation only. It's not
Right.
like, any third, party can start selling on Target's marketplace. So
Hmm.
they've clearly had a tighter control in terms of, third party sellers. So I think it really depends on the model. Are we, again, looking to get as big and broad and deep of selection as possible? Well, that certainly suggests a much more, open marketplace. But I think we're seeing kind of all points in between that fully open versus, invite only. I think, emerge, and I think that's where, we'll start to see. The retailers, again, put any third party seller through their own brand filter, in a
Right.
sense, right? And I think, we've yet to really, I think, see that, take place. I think we're starting to see that in certain, like, businesses, but again, still pretty early days.
It is, and for the challenges or concerns that maybe some retailers had, consumer brands in some cases had their own kind of war stories, if you will, and to some degree, it felt like a lot of brands use marketplace sellers as perhaps an outlet for selling outdated or distressed products, but now those benefits feel like they're a little bit more strategic. And to our earlier comments, they're now taking a more strategic approach to the benefits of marketplace selling. Would you agree?
Yeah, I certainly agree that early days of marketplace selling, was often seen as a end of product life cycle channel, and certainly, we did see a lot of that. And yet, I think as marketplaces have proliferated and the different variations have kind of emerged, again, the specialty marketplaces, that we don't see over, in North America, for example, like
Right.
the lifestyle marketplaces, all organic, or fair trade types of, marketplaces. These are different, opportunities, for brands, but I do think, one of the interviewees, a very experienced, brand executive who has sold a lot through marketplaces, both domestically, and internationally, kind of, put it well. We were talking about, again, the brand control hypotheses, in particular, and he says, you can't, but you have to be active in the marketplace in order to really manage your brand, appropriately, right?
Right.
Just seeing where, he was saying that, it's not the job of the marketplace. They cannot, police, your brand, for you. You have to do that, yourself. So again, just where we're seeing, brands, really look at these channels as not just a place to, again, sell end of life cycle, products, as much as how can we, look at this from perhaps, a differentiated, like, product strategy, right? In some cases, unique to the channel, product. And this is where we've seen the convergence, with a lot of social commerce and marketplaces, right? We've heard this, from a lot in brands who have been, who we consider successful in their social commerce, strategies. They've all said we have really had a bespoke product or merchandising strategy for, that channel, right? And use the, the whole medium, to and the customer experience to, again, really showcase, unique products. So I think, this is where, rather than an across the board, let's put all of our assortment out there. I think a lot of considered thought in terms of, well, what is that right mix, given, who shops there, right? It'd be
Right.
no different in a sense, from, if we were looking, say, at our real estate, and merchandising strategy, like for, some, super regional, mall, we're probably going to have a different assortment, than, some, tier three, kind of, mall, strip mall or something like that. Right. So, these are all things that I think, we're only now starting to see these refinements, happening where, whether from a brand or a retailer's perspective, they're really starting to optimize, the channel.
That makes sense. One of the key learnings I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on is if you look at markets outside the US, you touched on this a little bit, but maybe when you look at markets outside the US, are there applicable learnings or best practice operators, perhaps, that as you participated in this study, you would maybe hold up as a great learning or a best practice for those of us here in the US to look at and say, wow, there's that's someone to watch. There's learnings that have come from the way that they've done it, and there's leverageable best practices that we can apply to our business.
Yeah, no, I think Europe is going to be, Europe as a whole is going to be great to watch, over the next, 10 years, let's say, within, the marketplace sector overall, just because there has been such a proliferation of, different types of, marketplaces. So unlike, the U.S. Market, which the biggest players, still really dominate. Europe, it's less concentrated, right? As a whole. So I think, the choice that, any brand might have, in saying, okay, how do we look at marketplace channels as a whole, and, with where do we want to be kind of selling through? Well, I think, that's where there's no single, best practice, leader, but it's not necessarily a slam dunk, that a brand would naturally start with a big player like, Amazon. They might go directly to a vertical specialist like a Zalando, or again, look to build relationships, with a hybrid marketplace. Like we were impressed with Media Mart, kind of the biggest electronics, retailer in Europe, and what they were doing with their third party marketplace. Right. That one of the things that really kind of stood out for us was where they're now testing out, showcasing some third party marketplace sellers within a physical store. Right. So again, carving out some real estate, valuable real estate within, the store to really promote some of these third party sellers on the marketplace. So we expect to see more of these kinds of like omni-channel merchandising, approaches. And here's the thing that, I mean, you and I've talked about this in the past. So I think I always look to kind of promotional cadence, right? When it
Right.
comes to omni-channel. And again, where are we going to be consistent versus where what might we be channel, specific, with some of our promotions. And really it's there's never any kind of one size fits all, right? So how do you really hone in on that and kind of optimize? We've yet to kind of, see that type of next level kind of optimization. I would say so. Again, no single way to kind of, go to market, and I think that's kind of what makes it interesting right now. Whether you're a U.S. brand looking to sell, internationally, or looking to sell more, domestically, right? I mean, marketplaces, are clearly a viable option. So, again, how does that stack up, when we compare it against, the cost and effort of, standing up our own channels, or again, traditional, distribution in a wholesale manner, whether through distributors or through a traditional retailer, relationship. So all of these, the marketplaces just kind of add, like an interesting level of choice, for both, the retailer and the brand. And I still think a lot of, companies are a little bit on the fence and haven't, really kind of committed to that, one way or the other. Right. But I think they too are probably feeling the heat to, really carve out, what's right for them.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe the biggest takeaways as I read through the study, Jim, was yes, it's a huge sales and growth channel today, but the learnings that come from participating, not standing on the sidelines, but getting in the game, so to speak, is probably where the longer term benefits. But it feels like the advice that we would want to give both brands and retailers is at the very least, get in the game, participate, get the learnings, and build a strategy over the course of time. Would you agree?
I totally agree, and I'd add to that, add an analyst to that team. Get an analyst to dive in, right? Just rooting around, for opportunities, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen that, in I'd say early stage digital retail, strategies, like over the years, right? I mean that relatively, like low cost, kind of analysts will pay for their salary manyfold,
Yeah.
with just kind of the insights and often the revenue opportunity that they can unearth, right? And I think that those are the kind of light bulb moments that we think are so important for the organization as a whole, because all of a sudden, what that analyst unearths, kind of floats up to the senior team,
Yeah.
and that can have, like a very big, snowball effect for sure.
Well, that is awesome. Jim, thank you so much for bringing your insights and bringing this study to into focus for us. Feels like it's an exciting growth opportunity, certainly for retailers and consumer brands alike. And I thank you for joining us today.
Well, yeah, again, thanks for having me back, Scott. Always a pleasure to have, a chat like this, and certainly look forward to hearing from, different companies in terms of, where they're at now, but really where they going, with their marketplace strategies.
Absolutely. In fact, I'll offer our listeners if you'd like to get more information on this topic or download your own copy of Ebeltoft's digital marketplace study, you can visit Macmillan Doolittle's website and download the study yourself at macmillandoolittle.com/global publications. And the neat thing is, not only will you find this study, but a treasure trove of other white papers and other studies on a number of retail topics, not only from the US, but from around the world. And so, just a lot of great learnings, a lot of great opportunities. Thank you all for listening today and for joining us for the Digital Front Door. I'm Scott Benedict. Thanks for listening.